In 1887, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle published A Study in Scarlet, the first in a long series of stories following the world's greatest detective, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock was an extremely intelligent man who would use his extraordinary sense of logical deduction to solve seemingly impossible mysteries. Always at his side was Dr. John Watson, Sherlock's trusty partner, who would not only assist in the solving of each case, but would transcribe and publish their adventures to the public, often serving as a narrator for each book. Since then, the characters of Sherlock and Watson have become household names, and countless attempts have been made to bring them into the visual mediums of cinema and television. And while some have fared better than others, none really managed to capture the incredible dynamic between the two partners that had originally caught readers' attention. That is, until the release of Etan Cohen's 2018 masterpiece, Holmes and Watson. The film was an absolute triumph, finding that perfect balance between hard-hitting satire and comedic relief. Actors Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly were cast in their respective roles of Holmes and Watson as a biting piece of commentary, satirizing the typical Hollywood whitewashing often found in Sherlock Holmes adaptations, casting American actors like Robert Downey Jr. in what was meant to be a British role. On the other hand, the film knows when to set aside the commentary and throw in gags purely for humor's sake, with no actual statement behind them.
An assurance that only the finest and most qualified man will lead, not a wealthy tyrant who cares for nothing but himself.
But you have the Electoral College, which surely will prevent some trumped-up charlatan from gaining power.
Not always, unfortunately.
It would be great to have a strong businessman.
Yes, audiences were engaged to the point that some couldn't even bear to finish the whole movie. The experience was just too powerful. But why? What does Cohen's paragon of cinema accomplish that all other attempts failed to? Perhaps the answer can be found in the film's opening quote. "Logic is the sword by which we slay the ancient superstitions, but lo, the heart has its own truth to teach us." Hannah Montana, Season 2, Episode 4. What exactly does Cohen mean by this? Well, to answer that question, we'll need to go all the way back to 1872, more than a decade before Sir Arthur published that first gripping mystery. Fascinated by the purely masterful dramas of the ancient Greeks, philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote The Birth of Tragedy, a book exploring the difference between what he believed were the two defining approaches to art, Apollonian and Dionysian, named for the Greek gods Apollo and Dionysus. Apollonian art is more logical. The audience always remains somewhat at a distance from the piece, taking in the base meaning without going over what Nietzsche calls the delicate line which the dream image may not cross so as to work its effect pathologically. Dionysian art, on the other hand, is more primal. It's not so much meant to be interpreted as it's meant to be felt and experienced. Art of pure physicality. Nietzsche explains that all art falls somewhere within these two ideas, and such is the case in Holmes and Watson. Our example of the Apollonian is Sherlock himself. Cohen introduces him to us as a young, lonely boy who couldn't connect with the other children. They tease him with emotion, promising a kiss from his crush, yet at the same time they place a blindfold on him, representing how he is blind to physicality. With no other choice, Sherlock locks away his emotions and becomes purely Apollonian, dedicating his life solely to logic and reason, ignoring his feelings entirely. But due to this transition, Sherlock finds himself completely ill at ease with the realm of physicality, vomiting at the mere hint of gore. He tries to compensate for this with deductive reasoning, but it's never quite enough, as is demonstrated in his fight with the muscular brawn and encounter with the deadly mosquito.
Deadly bee swarm averted.
The musketeers vanquished. Well done, Holmes.
It's a simple matter of geometry, entomology, and physics. Oh my God!
He must resort to opium to achieve any semblance of physical pleasure. This is why Sherlock falls for Millicent. As we learn, Millicent was raised by feral cats and has the mental capacity of a 4-year-old. She lives her life like a cat, perhaps the most hedonistic of creatures in existence, and therefore purely Dionysian. And so Sherlock's greatest dream is to be with her and open an ice cream store. Ice cream being perhaps the strongest symbol of physical temptation. Likewise, Watson is our film's representation of the Dionysian. He approaches everything with physicality, always turning to violence as his initial resort and living entirely within the whims of his own emotions. We see this raw passion in his need to turn Sherlock's logical mysteries into literary thrillers, and his constant lust for the Queen of England.
I love you. I know I am duty-bound to serve you, but let me just say on a personal note, I really like you.
Stop touching her.
Just as a fan.
He cannot help but express himself physically, or in typical Dionysian form, musically. As is often the case when one submits entirely to hedonism, his physical bouts often end in destruction. Within the film's first act, we see Watson destroy a gavel, a clock, a statue of justice, a clipboard, a typewriter, and a statue of a man holding what appears to be a giant pencil. But of course, these are not mere random objects. They are deliberate choices of mise-en-scène that give us an insight into the inner turmoil of Watson's mind. Each item represents an aspect of the Apollonian that he fails to possess. The gavel, clock, and statue of justice represent the laws that serve as a foil to Watson's primal Dionysian urges. Items like the clipboard, typewriter, and pencil man represent the tools of the Apollonian, things used for logical and intellectual pursuits. Watson is at a total loss when it comes to pursuits of logic in the mind, creating great frustration. How can he be Sherlock's co-detective when he can't beat him in chess or even communicate telepathically?
Me talkie, you fine killer.
And like Sherlock, Watson finds his own love interest in Grace Hart. Being a doctor and a pioneer in the field of medicine, Grace contains the very intellectual ideals that Dr. Watson is missing in his own life. As we're later shown, his deepest dream involves playing chess with Dr. Hart, to finally cross over into that world of logic. But why do they so desperately need the qualities of both the Apollonian and Dionysian? Well, as Nietzsche says, it is only when the Apollonian and Dionysian are brought together that true art is created, and so Holmes and Watson each desire the qualities their partner possesses in order to be complete. Just take a look at the film's antagonists. First, we have Sherlock's longtime enemy, Professor Moriarty. Just like Sherlock, he is completely Apollonian, caring only about facts and logic and caring not the least bit for emotion or human life. Yet his plans are foiled so constantly that at the beginning of the film he gives up entirely and flees to America. Clearly the Apollonian alone is not enough. But then we're introduced to our second antagonist, Miss Hudson, who we later discover was Professor Moriarty's daughter and the secret hand behind the film's mysterious murders. Unlike her father, Miss Hudson is completely Dionysian. You see, one must remember that this film is an 1800s period piece, a time when women were only viewed as beings of emotion and incapable of man's intelligence. Of course, this does not reflect my or necessarily Mr. Cohen's views. The film is just using the conventions of the time to make a thematic point. Throughout the film, we find Miss Hudson with a large multitude of different lovers. She simply can't express herself any way besides sexually, and as we discover, she is purely motivated by a need for her father's love, something she will never attain. So it's obvious that neither Sherlock or Watson will be complete until they share the attributes of both the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Their failure to do so results in frustration and their eventual separation as Holmes accuses Watson of murder. But all that changes when Sherlock gazes upon an old photograph of the two embracing. The photo depicts our heroes on a vacation in Eastbourne, Holmes posing as a strong sailor and Watson as a beautiful mermaid. So what does this mean? Well, the mermaid is a very Dionysian image, often used as a symbol for lust and sexual desire, while the sailor is clearly a more Apollonian image, like the sailors of Melville's Moby Dick, caring only for logic and never letting their emotions get the best of them. These are qualities we've obviously attributed to the characters before, but only now upon seeing the two of them together does Holmes realize that it is only together the two of them can become one complete whole. It is in this moment each character gains the traits they've been lacking by breaking out into an elaborate music number. While this may seem like a strange way to approach such a crucial scene in an otherwise non-musical movie, it is actually very deliberate. As Bernice Rosenthal discusses in her essay Losev's development of themes from Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche's ideas in Greek literature can also be expanded into the realm of music. Dionysian music is focused on the loss of self-consciousness, passionate, tragic, and connected to the emotions of the world around you. Apollonian music is opposed to the element of ecstasy, and is more ponderous while losing much of the substance and cosmic nature of Dionysian music. And so now, lacking the traits their partners once brought to the table, Holmes and Watson must sing in compensation. A changed man, Sherlock now sings in the Dionysian. His verse is filled with raw tears and newfound emotions. Watson, on the other hand, finds himself finally understanding the Apollonian. Robbed of his best friend, he now sings not of emotion, but of less melodious, logical conundrums, such as what led to Sherlock's betrayal, and where he went wrong. Each now having become fully Apollonian and Dionysian, the two are able to team up again, Watson having learned to control logic, and Sherlock to give in to emotion. Only now are they able to use both these abilities to save the day and get their women. Each receives an item symbolizing this change. Sherlock finally finds a hat that suits him, allowing him to exude pure Dionysian physicality. And Watson gets his co-detective plaque, representing his newfound abilities in the Apollonian art of deduction. They finally become complete, what Nietzsche would refer to as perfect art, because as once quoted to us by Hannah Montana, "Logic is the sword by which we slay the ancient superstitions, but lo, the heart has its own truths to teach us."